Thank you, Fiona, very much. And ladies and gentlemen, may I apologize, first of all, for the fact that a week at the United Nations has left me with a heavy cold, and therefore listening to this speech is likely to be the work of hard-working people indeed. But bear with me, and we will get through it. And I want to thank, first of all, our outstanding team in the Foreign Office. Saeed Abbasi, a foremost champion of freedom of religion. David Lidington, the best Europe minister we've had in decades. Hugo Swire, who is pioneering new embassies in Latin America. Alistair Burt, a picture of calm, whatever the storm in the Middle East. Mark Simmons, bringing new energy to Britain's ties in Africa. Stephen Green, revolutionizing our support to British exporters. And I thank all our PPSs, the inimitable Keith Simpson, the irrepressible Tobias Elwood, the urbane Richard Graham, the tenacious Margot James, and the unflappable Eric Ollerenshaw. Give them all a round of applause. My team and I returned yesterday from the UN General Assembly in New York. We fanned out across the corridors and chambers of the United Nations, working on dozens of issues, from building up Libya's security forces to helping Lebanon cope with refugees, from aiding Burma on the path to democracy to promoting peace in Sudan, from combating religious intolerance to preserving Africa's wildlife. Across the full breadth of Britain's global diplomacy, we are injecting energy and commitment abroad that keeps British people safer at home. And above all, in New York this week, we have been seeking a peaceful solution to some of the world's most intractable problems: the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the nuclear program of Iran, and the tragic bloodshed in Syria. And on each of them this week, we have made progress. We have urged Israelis and Palestinians on towards a permanent peace and given our steadfast support to their negotiations. I want our conference to pay tribute to the bold leadership of Secretary John Kerry, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and President Abbas. Our message to them is: this is the best chance in a decade, perhaps the last chance, of ending this conflict, and Britain is with you every step of the way. We have stepped up the pressure on Assad and his regime and given new help to save the lives of innocent victims of their oppression. On Friday night at the UN Security Council, I cast Britain's vote for a resolution requiring the destruction of Syria's chemical weapons. And working with the foreign ministers of the other permanent members of the Security Council, we agreed to convene a peace conference for Syria by mid-November. Millions of bereaved and displaced people deserve every effort by the leading countries of the world to bring this tragic conflict to an end. We've set a date, too, for new negotiations with Iran over its nuclear program. Twice last week, I sat down for talks with the new foreign minister of Iran. We welcome the new and positive message from the Iranian government that they are ready to negotiate. And it's vital that these promising words are matched with genuine action. We will test Iran's sincerity to the full, and we will take important steps ourselves. The talks which we agreed on, improving our bilateral relations, have already begun. But we are not naive, and we will never be starry-eyed. We will miss no opportunity for diplomacy to prevail and the spread of nuclear weapons peacefully to be prevented. We must never understate the great dangers to peace and security these challenges bring, but nor should we underestimate what can be achieved through resolute diplomacy. Diplomatic success often follows a readiness to use power that is hard as well as persuasive. The reason Iran is at the negotiating table is because we have imposed and maintained the toughest sanctions in modern times on its nuclear program. The reason Syria now wants to hand over its chemical weapons is because the United States threatened military action. To do our utmost to resolve these conflicts is in our national interest, and so is sticking up for British nationals around the world and for Britain's overseas territories, another part of the job of the Foreign Office. You would think that that was obvious. Later today, I will be proud to speak alongside the Chief Minister of Gibraltar. But the last Labour government was prepared to negotiate away British sovereignty over Gibraltar against its people's wishes. This government will never do that. The leader of the Labour Party didn't mention the European Union once in his speech last week. Our Prime Minister set out our plan in January, renegotiate a new deal in Europe, and then put the decision to stay in the EU or leave to the British people in a referendum. It's the referendum that James Wharton, who you've seen today, our youngest MP and one of our best, is with his skill and energy taking through Parliament, and that your Conservative MPs are doing everything they can to make the law of the land. It's the right course for the country, because democratic consent for Britain's membership of the European Union is now wafer thin. And that is above all because Labour in government signed away power after power in treaties without ever giving the British people the say they need and deserve. So now the EU has a bigger place in our national life than most people in Britain ever wanted or will ever want. And it has that place without their permission. The British people want change, and they want a choice, and we will give them that choice. Cosmetic change is not enough. We want a real change to how the European Union works, an end to never-ending centralization, a Europe that understands the global race we're all in, a Europe that isn't about ever more rules, regulations, and interference from Brussels, but lets power go back to Parliament and to voters. That is the Europe that we want. This change must go to the heart of what the European Union is for and where it is heading. To take one key principle, the EU treaties commit every single member of the EU to lay the foundations of an ever closer union among the peoples of Europe. From the signing of the original Treaty of Rome, this phrase has been part of the EU's fundamental framework. But as our Prime Minister has said, for Britain that is not the objective, and it never has been. Nation states working together with common rules, yes, but Britain as part of a superstate, never. If some countries want ever closer union, they can go ahead. But for those like us that don't want it and don't believe in it, it should go. The Dutch have also said enough to ever closer union. They propose Europe where necessary, national where possible. That would be a far superior principle for Europe. So let's write that into the EU's rules, that wherever possible, it shouldn't be about more power for the Union. Decisions should belong to each nation state. That would be a fundamentally different approach for Europe, and that is what we want to bring about. To those in Brussels who say that nothing should or need be changed, Edmund Burke taught us long ago that an organization without the means of some change is without the means of its own conservation. When David Cameron set out his vision for real change in Europe, he warned that he would be denounced as a heretic. But I can tell you that Europe needs heresy, and his heresy is spreading fast. People used to think there was only one destination, a federal Europe, and the only question was whether you got there in the slow lane or the fast lane. They don't think that anymore. Governments across Europe are talking about power coming back to the countries of Europe. This is something new. And even now, some people say that real change isn't possible, often the Labour Party, who never tried to change anything at all. But just look at what we've achieved in 3 years in government. A referendum lock in law, now accepted by the other parties, so that never again can treaties shift power from Britain to Brussels without the British people's consent. No more of the Eurozone bailouts that Labour signed us up to. The first time a power has ever been returned from Brussels to Britain. The EU budget cut for the first time, and unlike Labour, not an inch given on the rebate hard won by Margaret Thatcher in 1984. And we have done more. A treaty that was against our national interest, vetoed. An EU military headquarters, vetoed. Dramatic reform of that long-running, wasteful and indefensible disaster, the common fisheries policy. An agreement that there should be no EU red tape for the smallest businesses. Free trade agreed with Korea and Singapore. And talks opened on free trade with Japan, the world's third largest economy, and on a transatlantic free trade deal with the United States, which we, as a nation dedicated to free trade, will do our utmost to achieve. And all this achieved in a coalition. Just think what we could accomplish on our own. Everything we have achieved and everything we want to achieve comes from active diplomacy and hard work. No single Labour Europe minister even bothered to visit every EU country. David Lidington has been to all of them and is over halfway round his second lap around all 28. We have made our security and foreign policy alliance with France stronger than it has ever been. The last government neglected our friendship with Germany, but we've invested in it. And by the way, we saw in Chancellor Merkel's great election victory what happens when a Conservative party that understands the global race meets a party of the left that doesn't understand the global race. And it's not just in Europe that this government is reviving British diplomacy. We're doing so across the globe because we know that a world without British influence would be a less safe, less free, less prosperous and crueler place. Our greatest leaders, Disraeli, Salisbury, Churchill, Thatcher, have always known that to be secure and successful at home, Britain must exert itself abroad. And standing as we do on the shoulders of these giants, we know it can never be part of a Conservative foreign policy to understate or to deliberately reduce our influence. Withdrawing from the world has never been the creed of the Conservative Party. We can't pull up the drawbridge to our islands. We will only get the best for Britain if we go out and work for it all over the world. And we have more to work with than perhaps any other country on earth. As we speak, soldiers in Sierra Leone are being trained by the British Army. Pirates are being held at bay in the Gulf of Aden by the Royal Navy. Terrorist plots are being tracked and foiled by our intelligence agencies. War criminals are being brought to account by British lawyers in courts from the Netherlands to Cambodia. Human rights defenders languishing in the prisons of repressive regimes are not forgotten because of British NGOs. 500,000 people are being taught English by the British Council in 49 different countries. Families in 850 million homes around the globe are tuning in to watch the Premier League. 400,000 overseas students are being educated at British universities. 500,000 more are studying for British degrees on campuses from Malaysia to Manhattan. Hundreds of thousands of girls in Pakistan and Yemen are going to school thanks to British development funding. And every 2 seconds somewhere in the world, a child is saved from life-threatening diseases by vaccines provided by the United Kingdom. All these things and more British people do. It's quite something for a small island, isn't it? We're able to keep ourselves and others safe because we do these things and because of our fine diplomats, our dedicated aid workers, our unmatched intelligence agencies, and because, as Philip Hammond has described, our armed forces are second to none. And when British companies can sell beer to Germany, as they do, wine to France, teapots to China, salmon to Russia, clothes to India, it's not only because their products are among the very best in the world, it's because British diplomats and trade representatives are active in 270 overseas posts, working for every person in this room and in our country, and the Prime Minister and I expect every minister travelling overseas to do the same. We can all be proud of what Britain accomplishes in the world. We can be proud that British people pioneered the Arms Trade Treaty and that we were one of the first countries to sign it. We should be proud that British aid is saving lives and helping to create opportunity for millions of impoverished people. And I am proud that at the United Nations last week, 120 countries promised for the first time to join me in my campaign to end impunity for war zone rape and sexual violence. Next year, we will hold a global conference in London and ask people of all parties and all nations to say that we will not accept that rape can be used as a weapon of war against millions of innocent women, men, and children, and that those who commit these crimes will never again go unpunished. We are out to change the entire global attitude to these crimes and also to attain that great strategic prize of the 21st century, full economic, social, and political rights for women everywhere. We should be inspired that when our campaigns are based on British democratic values, we can stir the conscience of the world and change the lives of millions of people. Let us be clear that it is unambiguously in our national interest that Britain plays this global role, and under this government we will never turn away from it. Most of what we achieve is through our diplomacy, our culture, and our generosity. Yet we should never shirk our tougher responsibilities or allow any country to think for a moment that Britain will not defend itself. And yes, the Falkland Islands will be British and defended by Britain for as long as the Falkland Islanders wish it to be the case. But this is not a government that is trigger-happy with our armed forces. As we reduce our forces in Afghanistan, the only major deployment of the British armed forces we have authorized was to save thousands of lives in Libya 2 years ago, which we did without the use of ground troops or the loss of a single British life in combat. In Somalia and Mali, we are using diplomatic and development power to stabilize fragile states, supporting African troops fighting on the ground. And the appalling terrorist attack in Kenya last week shows why our resolve to continue that work must never be shaken. We will keep on expanding our influence in the world. The BBC World Service has more listeners than at any time in its history, up by 26 million in the last 2 years. We have 6 of the world's top 20 universities. So we must open the sluice gates of our soft power, those rivers of ideas, diversity, ingenuity, knowledge, and values, and let them flow across the world, cultivating influence that flows rather than power that jars. Our foreign policy supports that objective. And remember this, the last Labour government closed 43 British diplomatic missions overseas and retreated from 17 countries altogether. They left our country less able to defend our national interest. We are opening up to 20 new embassies and consulates in Asia, Latin America, and Africa. We are doing that with a smaller budget, and Britain is better represented across the world. Remember, too, that we are the only European country enlarging our diplomatic footprint in this way. Britain, led by us, is going to be active in more places, helping our businesses in more places, and it is going to look after more British nationals at the same time. The rudderless retreat of the Labour years is now over. Remember that under the last government, there were British posts overseas that did no trade promotion work whatever. Now it is clear to every embassy, high commission and consulate that they create opportunity for hard-working British businesses that brings jobs and prosperity at home. Remember that in 2009, UK exports were going down. Now they're going up. Last year, exports to Russia were up by more than 11%, China by more than 13%, Thailand by 41%, South Korea by 83%. This was in 1 year. Far beyond Europe, we are working in every corner of the globe to create growth in the British economy. It's by expanding British trade that we will escape the debt-fueled false boom of the Labour years and secure our country's future. Remember that last year, foreign direct investment in the world economy fell by a fifth, but in the UK it rose by a fifth. That's because we are pursuing George Osborne's tax policies, Michael Gove's education policies, and Ian Duncan Smith's welfare policies that are making Britain competitive once more. Remember that in 13 years, no Labour Foreign Secretary made a bilateral visit to our cousin countries, Canada, Australia, or New Zealand. And I've visited them many times and have visited over 70 countries now on behalf of Britain, including some where no British Foreign Secretary had set foot for years or indeed at all. And remember, that the last government ran down and sidelined the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, but we are building it up again. They actually closed the language school of the Foreign Office. Last month, I opened it again. And now I will open a new diplomatic academy to seal the revival of the Foreign Office. When it comes to negotiation, language, and diplomacy, British diplomats will be beyond doubt the very best in the world. We will never rely on anyone else to look after our national interest. And remember, finally, that we have a Prime Minister who leads all of this from the front and who I can see every day is respected throughout the world for being unshakable in his conviction and always representing his country with pride, determination, and toughness. He always stays the course, he always thinks about the next generation, and he will always deserve the great enthusiasm of this country. We are not going back, by contrast, to the days of a drifting left-wing union-dominated, debt-laden, heavy-handed, conniving, infighting, backstabbing, unrepentant Labour leadership who have learnt nothing from their errors. They have learnt nothing from their errors, apologized for none of their disasters, and they left our country weaker in the world. So it is the policy of this government to work with other nations in shaping a more peaceful and prosperous common future, making full use of the ingenuity and inventiveness of the British people, and our unique vantage point at the crossroads of Commonwealth, NATO, European alliances, and our special relationship with the United States. We have brought and will continue to bring purpose and determination to our dealings with the rest of the world, and will always retain and expand our influence abroad to the benefit of hard-working people here at home. Thank you very much indeed.